Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Science Communication and Explication International Webinar held by School of Communication Atma Jaya Catholic University. Okay, before we start the plenary session, I would like to introduce to Professor Thomas A. Bauer, who will deliver the keynote address. He is an experienced professor at the Department of Communication at the University of Vienna, who is also a co-founder of Octo Community Vienna and a president of the European Society for Education and Communication. Professor Bauer, time is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this kind introduction. It's really an honor for me to be with you. I have to thank Dorien for organizing all this. It was not so easy as far as I know, it's so many people, but it's really fine that we can come together even under those conditions we are suffering from, all of us. I was thinking what I should present to you, and I was discussing a little bit with Dorien what it should be, and she encouraged me to encourage you and to challenge you with a theoretical lecture on epistemology, or better saying, epistemological conditions of theorizing communication. The question is, can we theorize communication? Should we theorize communication as we already know what communication is in our everyday life? And if we do, how are we doing it and why should we do that? And I try to give us an answer to all those questions, and also try to give you somehow an approach to, let me say, the current way of theorizing and making a science on the construct of communication. As you know, I'm a professor at the University of Vienna, Department of Communication, still already emeritus, but still working there, as I'm representing somehow the one part is media education, media literacy, media competence, communication competence. And on the other side, I'm working very much for philosophy of communication, philosophy of society, what always means understanding the communication as a paradigm of being human and as a paradigm of becoming a society. And I think it's very important I always thought it would be important to deepen the theoretical understanding of communication, because we are using it in media law, in media politics, in media education, and in media economics. And that's why it's really important to think about what do we mean by the term of media on the one hand, and why do we think that media has something to do with communication. This is not so self-understanding. So there must be some thinking behind that, why we contextualize communication to media and media to communication, knowing that all those terms, on the one hand, we try to identify objects, of course, but on the other hand, we know that those are just, let me say, metaphors of description. Because if we say communication, or society, or culture, or religion, or media, those are always just metaphors of description, what we experience and how we experience somehow those how shall I say in English, things, they belong together. So that means if we think media have something to do with communication, so that says that we are observing media with a special paradigm, with an interest of communication. And if we observe a media in the interest of economy or management or organization or politics, so then we always mix in somehow an interest of observation, an interest of knowledge, and we cannot observe things without unless having somehow ideas of what we are watching. So watching things is not only just as they come to me, it's always as I am able to see them, to see them and to observe them. And this is always, and I will try to bring this more systematically. It's always an observation on at least 4 different interests of knowledge: a normative interest of knowledge, an empirical interest of knowledge, a critical interest of knowledge, or a pragmatic interest of knowledge. And this is what I want to explain with my next going on lecture. So the next slide, the question first is, why do we need theories? Because when we talk about communication, we think we know what communication is. And we often hear as communication scientists, why do we talk about communication in such difficult terms, as we already know in everyday life what communication is? So that means there are maybe 2 different levels. The one level, which I come to that later, then again, the one level is the intuitive theory of communication, the everyday theory of communication, and the other level is the more logical. They are somehow in a dialectical relation to each other. They need each other because they are different approaches to what we call communication. I will come to that. But first is, theories, they interrupt the routines of thinking. As I say, we have an understanding of communication, but maybe the routine as we understand communication, society, culture, religion, family, whatever, those routines, they are somehow related to cultural programs developed over times, but they maybe they have some weaknesses, and the weakness could be that we are in everyday life, we are all mostly interested in reducing the complexity of what we observe, to reduce the complexity of what we do, or as we do it, because as we observe it. So if we want to reduce the complexity in doing the communication, in doing the society, in doing religion, in doing family, we try also to reduce the complexity how we observe communication, how we see family, how we see media, how we see communication. And exactly that is what theory not should do. See, theory focus on complexity, make things more complex than we are able to do them in everyday life, in order to be prepared, on the one hand, to be prepared for surprises, how things are developing, but on the other hand as well, knowing that all what we observe in a sociological or social scientist level, we are not observing objects. We are not observing society as an object, media as an object, communication as an object. We are observing as we think about society, as we think about communication, as we think about religion, family, and so on. So the difficulty of and the challenge of doing social science always is to reflect our observing and our thinking, and because things are as we see them, and not it's of course it's a constructivist approach, but saying that we have to understand that we are not observing objects, but we are observing objectivation of what we call media or family or communication or society or whatever. So that means theories manage the contingency. Those things I'm talking about could be otherwise than they are. Society could could be otherwise as it is. Communication could be otherwise as it is. Culture, religion, family, and so on. I'm just taking some examples in order to make understandable what I'm talking about. To manage the contingency means we need to think those terms in a most possible complex way. On the one hand, in order to prepare what we should do with. On the other hand, knowing that they are construction. And the construction of communication, the construction of society, and whatever says, if it is a construction in order to construct the reality, then it always can be otherwise constructed as we do it. So this is, I think, a philosophical approach that makes us thinking that the social, the cultural change is something which is not owned by the things, not owned by this society, not owned by communication, not owned by media or owned by cultures, but the complexity and the order and the change of what we are observing is always the complexity and the order and the change as we think it. We think the change, we think the order, and we think the complexity. So that's why we have, as social scientists, we have to rethink what we are thinking, and maybe let me say for communication science must not be a scientific approach to say what communication is, or to say we know as scientists better what communication is than in everyday life. No, I think our duty is to think, to rethink, why are we thinking communication as we think it? Why are we thinking society as we think it? Why are we thinking religion or family or culture or language as we think it? So because then and I will come to that, then we could say that we could think communication, I will do it on that example, we could think communication in another way, with other paradigms, other orders, other complexities as we do. I will come to that later. But of course, theory also have to observe the practice critically, find out a criteria, characteristics criteria, in order then to be able to classify them. What is, let's say, a good communication or a bad or faith communication? What is a good society or what is a bad society? Whatever. I mean, it's not only those good and bad, but you know what I mean. We need to classify what we observe in order to give us the opportunity as well, the challenge to find or to step on next, let's say, better orders than we already do. And that's why we have to analyze the reality according to categories and criteria of the order as we think things are or should be. I will come to that later saying, but I try to say it here already. A theory is somehow a way to explain what we are thinking about, for example, communication, on which logical level, on psychological, on sociological, on anthropological level, for example. And logic is a special way which gives us somehow a basis of thinking. But as we try to explain on a logical order, on a logical level, sorry, we order already what we observe. And as we observe it in the interest, as we observe communication and media and society in the interest of understanding the order as we think it, not as it has it, as we think it. So then we are able to classify and to find out characteristics or criteria to say it works or it does not work well. And Of course, we have also theories in order to, theories order help us somehow, not just to classify, but also to say, what could we expect if we do it that way? What could we expect is the come out? If we do it in another way, what could we expect as it comes out? And that's the way how we do, for example, the empirical research in the logical system of a causality, knowing that if we understand any reason, we could understand the outcome, the effect of a reason. Or if we want to have a special effect, for example, freedom of media, so then we could ask us, what conditions should be built in order to come to a system of free media or democratic media, or whatever we think we should develop or we should do. The next slide, please. So that's what I'm trying to say. Theories explain on a level of logic, but I have to say for the logic, we are usually thinking in a more, let's say, causal logics or logic of causality, and we think the best logic or the most objective logic is to have a formal language. And the best formal language we have, for example, is mathematics. In mathematics, we know 2 and 2, the reason of 1 and 1 and the reason of 2 and 2 always has the result of 2 or 4 or whatever. 5 and 5 always is 10. And it doesn't depend on what we are counting, if it is apple or people or whatever. So this is a formal language by which we find out somehow the causal logical system. But life is not a logical thing. Life has another order, has not a formal order. We can bring it in a formal language, but the reality or life itself is not done in a formal language. So that means we are just finding, using theory in order to have an order how we could or how we should observe things. They are interesting for us if it is communication or media or religion or family or whatever. So theories, they direct our perspective, they focus, and they contextualize the observation. That's why it is important to have a theoretical framing for whatever we want to talk about. And the framing always challenges us to contextualize or gives us maybe even the possibility to theorize, for example, communication. If you say, if we observe and say communication has to do maybe with truth, has to do with identity, has to do with whatever. So then we contextualize communication and we contextualize in the interest of an order and saying communication has to do with my identity. And when I want to understand my or other identity, I'm asking about my or others' communication. Where are they how are they contextualized with others? So this gives us the possibility to observe those constructs in the interest of order, to observe those constructs in the and to analyze those constructs in the interest of an order. And that's why we have to ask ourselves, what order is it by which we, or what paradigm, even better to say, what paradigm is it as we observe communication or media or society or identity and so on. And by that we can, as I said before, we can classify the phenomena and the meaning of the phenomena. We can find abstract characteristics, and by identifying characteristics, we then can say this is communication, this is media, this is society, and whatever. So we have an order of an objectivation of categories in order to bring them together. So they are enabling us, especially an empirical approach, to find a causal frame of what we are observing, and enables us to find somehow how shall I say, to find the rational practice of communication, of society, whatever, or even the unrational practice. Next slide, please. So what I'm trying to say is that when we bring communication into a frame of science or scientific observation, you know that we have maybe two different levels. One is a more, we call them a cold theory, and the other is a warm theory. The more cold theory, the severe theories, it's very natural, science oriented. It's science. It's the analysis of an objective world, focusing on the structures. So we are doing communication science, for example, very much in understanding the structural system of communication, and maybe we do less in understanding what do those structures, what is the meaning of those structures, because the reality is not the structure, the reality is what those structures mean as we use them. For example, as we use communication in order to state myself, my identity, or to connect to another, or to connect to the society, especially also with media. So doing studies, this is more trying to understand, and understanding what we observe is needs a more open theory, and needs let me say more an interpretation of what I'm observing, and not an identification or definition of what I'm seeing. So you see, this is the difference. We need a theory, as I said before, but there are different theories, more scientific theories and the more studied theories. And as we are observing, as I said before, as we are not observing the objects, and to see how the objects are structured, but as we try to understand how do we see communication, how do we observe media, how do we observe the relation between media and society and politics and culture and religion and family and whatever. So that's why we need more an open theory, knowing that open theories are approaches and are not definitions, are trying to understand why we understand as we understand. And this is exactly what the hermeneutical theory means. It means if we see the reality of, or try to see the reality of the society, it's always an interpretation of our interests to how we see, what we see, why we see. And this is what we need, I think, much more in our theoretical approach to communication and media, in order to get deeper on the one way and more to focus not on superficial problems, but on the challenges, on the intrinsic challenges of communication, media, and society. The next slide. I said already, we have an intuitive theory. I'm coming to communication exactly now. We have an intuitive theory of communication, or a situative model of knowledge, and we have a logical theory. What we are doing as scientists is to find a logical theory, not to explain better the communication, but to explain as we see in our intuitive theory the communication. So this is, we need both. When I wrote my book a couple of years ago, the first sentence was, what communication is, we already know. And we know what communication is because we know it in the way as we try to see it. I will come to that later with an example to explain that. But as we already know what communication is, when we find a logical theory of communication, we do not, we cannot say we are observing an objective or an object of communication. An object of communication. Media is not going. But we observe as we think communication with our intuitive theory, and the intuitive theory as well is a normative understanding of communication, is an empirical understanding of communication, a pragmatic understanding of communication, asking us how should we do, and as well a critical one. Why are you talking to me as you talk? Why don't you talk in another way to me? So that means that we have criteria of a communication that is effective communication or a failing communication. So I think this is important that for also our philosophical approach. The philosophy of communication is not just anywhere in the heaven. The philosophy is also is somehow in this dialectic continuation between how we think communication and how we do communication. I will come to that later more exactly. Staying with the intuitive theory and logical theory, next slide, please. Is the intuitive theory is, as I tried to say, an interpretation as we observe, as we experience. By the logical theory is a concept of what we experience and what we observe on a logical, I don't have to say that what it means, on a logical level. As I said before, it can be an anthropocentric logical, centered logical. It can be a sociological, interested in understanding the sociability of human being. It can be a psychological theory interested in the psychic constitution of communication. It can politological, culturological, mediological. You see, there are many levels. Of course, they are always related to each other, and they have somehow a paradigm behind that must not be the logics of causality, that 1 and 1 is 2, as I said before. It's always the same outcome of the same reasons. It can be interpreted in another way than just in a formal, logical, mathematical, mechanical, technical way. You see what I'm doing? Mechanical, mathematics, mechanical, technology. They are all related to somehow a formal language of understanding communication or society or religion or whatever. But there's also a more open logical interpretation. And as we are observing communication as a construct, as we try to understand ourselves and as a construct of reality and a construct of relevance, that's why I think we should invest in our thinking more into those so-called soft theoretical systems in order to be more interpretative. You know, the how shall I say, the branch of the sociology in interpretative sociology. And I think we should really invest more in that, because we have already invested a lot of thinking in understanding the structures of communication. But, and I'm coming already to a critical point, just think with me, when we talk about communication, for example, as a process between a communicator and a recipient, or a producer and a user, or a consumer. So, and we try to build our theories on such a model of producing and consuming. So then we should be critical with ourselves, saying we are building our understanding of communication on an industrial model of communication, on an industrial model of media, and not a sociological or anthropological. And so that's why when we do media education, for example, or media law or media politics, we should maybe be clear that there is a change of paradigm in shifting from structures to cultures, from systems to experiences. So it means we need a more open theory, and we need to develop it in order to develop a science of communication that really helps us to understand what we do in the way as we want it to do. Because, and let me go to that 3 slides later. You see the cross. Just go on with the slides, please. Yeah, one more. Yeah, here. I'm trying to explain what I'm saying all the time with this model. We have somehow a vertical understanding of communication, a vertical understanding of society, a vertical understanding of religion, of family, and so on. I don't have to go on that. Vertical means we have an idea of communication. We have an idea of society. We have an idea of religion. In Greek, it's called a noema, somehow a model as we think religion, as we think family, as we think society, as we think culture, media, communication. And thinking it always means it has to do with our desire to be connected to any sense. Because it might be, let me say a philosophical sentence, it might be the challenge of human beings, or no, let me say it like this, it might be the destination of human being not to know why we are as we are, why we do as we do. It's a pre-theological, a pre-philosophical question, but it's the question that always is with us. What does it mean that I am as I am, and that I do as I do, that others do to me as they do, that I observe the reality as I observe it? What does this mean? And looking for the sense and asking for the sense always means that we are connected to a model of, to an idea of society and so on, and communication. But we do it, we do the society, we do the communication, and we do the religion, and we do the family, always related with the question, is it okay, is it right, is it somehow related to, as we think communication, as we think society, as we think religion, as we think family. So that means this vertical, looking up and looking down, is somehow a on a philosophical, on a logical level, it's a dialectic system saying the idea of communication and the reality of communication are to each other in a dialectical relation. They are as different as they need each other. Or I say they need each other because they are so different. We need to, in order to understand what we do, we need to think, why are we doing it? How should we do it? What are we doing? And this is why we need the science. And now I'm coming to the horizontal continuum. That why we need science. as a communication, as an interpretation, as a trying, attention to understand between theories and practice. And as you see, this horizontal line interrupts our routines of thinking, of communication, of religion, of society, and so on. And the interruption is we try to observe the practice. We need those observation of practice in order to find theories. And this observation of practice, this critical or this normative or this empirical observation of practice goes the upper way around, theories via ideas to practice, or goes the other way around, theories via as we experience or observe what we do in order to practice, for example, communication. So theory and practice is somehow the continuum of doing the science, and theories and practice in the same way as the idea and the reality, they are connected to each other in a dialectical way. They are as different as they need each other. They are as different as they are different. Sorry, yeah. So, and when we have this understanding of doing the science in relation, doing the scientific theory in relation and observing the everyday theory, and coming to the next slide. So then we can find somehow the paradigms, and the paradigm means in what order are we observing communication? Are we observing communication in a normative paradigm? Are we observing communication in a critical paradigm? Are we observing communication in an empirical paradigm as we observe it? Or are we observing it in a pragmatic paradigm? How should we do it? And I cannot show it here, but if you see that normative, critical, empirical, and pragmatic paradigm, you see that maybe in our academic life, we give too much because we are in stress of legitimation of what we do. Maybe we are too much oriented to the pragmatic paradigm. For example, how should we do journalism? How should we do politics? How should we do psychology, and so on? And maybe not enough in a critical or in a normative or empirical. But even, of course, if we just are focusing on paradigm, on a pragmatic paradigm, of course, we are connected to a normative understanding, a critical understanding, and an empirical understanding of, let's say, for example, journalism or public relations. And of course, we teach that and we research that, but the focus is always the interest of pragmatic, how should we do it? And maybe we do less or not enough in the interest of why should we do it as we do it, and what could we do it in order to be able to for its changes. And this is going to the next slide, a question of the ideology. And we, as far as I observe the communication science in its histories, at least in German context and in English, not Anglican, in the Anglistic context, my idea, my feeling is we are not enough clear about this ideological perspective of of the science as we do. Is it an idealistic normative paradigm following theory? Is it a pragmatic normative paradigm science? Is it more inductive, observing, as I wrote here, the observation guided generalization, or more in deductionism? We should be clear in that, especially when you're doing, or when we're doing a research, we should know, in what ideological framing we are observing. Of course, any focus, for example, idealism focus cannot be done without all the others. They are always related to each other. But the question is, where is our focus of interest? And I think we should amplify these focuses and these perspectives in order to be able then really to identify and to declare the philosophical interest of knowledge. I say it again, to declare the philosophical interest of knowledge. Why do we think we should know what we observe and what we research, and as we are doing it? And this is somehow what I'm showing here is somehow in order to explain how we could do it and why are we doing it. And the next slide, please. And I'm giving you an example now. What I was saying before, thinking, communication. Noema, or noema is a Greek word, means the idea or the model or the scheme of what we having in order to be able to observe. We cannot observe things if we do not have an idea of what we observe. So this is the noema. We could not observe communication if we would not have an noematic idea of it, or a noematic idea of religion, or a noematic idea of family, and so on. In communication, going to communication, we have two different ways of this noemata. That means two different paradigms as we think communication. The one is a more action-oriented paradigm, and the other is a more observation-oriented paradigm. We observe mostly communication as an action. We have many theories, actor theories, many theories, or most of the theories, they are understanding communication as an action. And for that we have models. The partnership model, for example, is nothing else than an action, interaction or transaction model of communication. That means that I have to do something in order that it can be identified as communication when I open the mouth and say something, or have a gesture or whatever. I have something to do in order to show this is what I'm doing is communication. And if you react, if you listen, or if you say yes or no, so then we interact. And the interaction model, of course, is another model of action, but has action as a model. We try to, because, sorry, I have to say that action has some interest in behind, and the interest of action, of thinking communication in a model of action, always means I do it because I have a goal. This is the rationality of acting. As we know from sociology, any acting always is something in order to achieve a goal. So this is called rationality. There's some reasonability behind that. And it's also thought in a model of causality. If I act, I should have an effect. Yeah? So it's always, and if it has not an effect, I have to augment the reason, or to change the reason in order to have an effect, or even in order to have the effect I want to achieve. So this has always to do, the action model has always to do with power, with influence, with effect, and with fight for right. I am right doing that. Is my right doing, it's not your right doing that with me, and so on. This is all related to the model, to the ordering model of action in interpreting, understanding, or theorizing communication. And the model, as I said before, the production and consumption model is an action model, of course. First, an action model. What we have not yet really developed, but is able, thought out of philosophy, it's a model of observation. communication as a model of observation. We communicate as we observe each other. And if we have this model of communication, that we understand each other, the community or the difference because of the way as we observe, that is a real interesting thing, because I hope you can, I don't know if you see me, because I see just the slides, but if you see me, then I can show. If I have a mirror and I give you the mirror to see and ask you, what are you seeing in that mirror? You would say, oh, of course it's me. Huh? I'm seeing myself. It's not. You are seeing yourself as you see you. You are observing yourself as you observe you. So this is what is happening. That means on a logical way, transferred to a logical way, if I'm observing from, let's say, from one religious culture and other religious culture, I'm not observing another object. I'm observing as I observe another culture. And you see, if we understand communication like this, then we came to quite other interests to understand the challenge, to understand the problem, to understand the solution of communication. Because then there is not rationality, causality, power, influence, effect, or fight for a right. It's orientation. I'm always orienting myself in where I'm standing in order to see what I see. And standing always means a standpoint is not only a local point, it's the point of identity. Who is me? Who is me observing you? Who is me observing the society? Who, and so on. So this is quite another understanding of another paradigm, another interest of knowledge, understanding the challenge, but also the contingency and the complexity of communication. So that means observation is much more interested in diversity, or even more, is much more interested in the difference of our standpoints as the action model, because the action model says, we understand each other if you do as I want you to do. Or if you see the things as I am seeing them and I want you to see them, then we have understood. You see, there's a model of power, there's a model of a subordination and whatever. I'm coming to that. So there are other interests of sociability than it is in a model of in an observation model of communication. I'm in a model of observation of communication. I'm not as much interested in causality, having a reason in order to have an effect, but much more in casuality. It could happen. It could be the fall. It could be happen. So this is much more interesting, because then I'm much more interested in surprise. Surprise is maybe the point of communication. If I'm surprised of whatever, of you because you say that, of me because I'm confronted with something I didn't know before about myself, or on the topic I didn't know before about the topic, this is maybe much more communication, this casuality, than the causality. And I'm not doing it in order to have an effect, but I'm doing it because it could give me some perspective. It could open an horizon I never have seen before. So in observation, I'm much more interested in newness. What is new? What could me surprise? What did I not know before? And you see, this is somehow much more interested in getting new knowledge, getting challenged than the other model. Sorry, than the other. I'm sorry. Than the other model is. So, observation model would be much more interested in otherness, in alternative things, and talking about, for example, I don't know as it is. I think it's not as much in Indonesia than it is here in Europe that we are confronted with otherness by migration. So otherness of culture. So maybe with a model of communication in a model of observations, as I'm trying to explain here, we would have, let me say, maybe it's very simple, less problems of communication if we would be much more interested in the otherness, saying, I am because there is an other, or because we are different, we need each other, because you are a representation of what society or religion or family can be. And my thinking is in a representation of what culture or communication or society or religion could be. Obviously, the contingency, what contingency means it's something that we have not yet realized, and it could be possible even if it is not necessary. This is what it means. What means contingency. So the observation model of communication would be much more a challenge of change and a chance of change than the action. Action is oriented in repeating technology, in repeating, because knowing I want to have some effects, and if I want to have an effect today and tomorrow and the next day, I'm always doing the same in order to have the same effect. So this is a very mechanical and the technical and the mathematical understanding of communication than the model of observation. The next slide, please. If we try to understand observation as an appropriation of reality or a construction of reality, so then we see that, and this is the next complexity, understanding communication in another way as we do, not as a model of congruence, but maybe as a model of difference, just in order to give us the idea of the contingency of communication. Usually we are thinking in the interest of congruence. Let's think in the same way about whatever in order to say we belong together, we are thinking the same. There's no paper in between of us. So we are connected to each other with any intermediate system. We need, yeah, you know what I mean. So this is somehow the interest of repetition, more of the same, do it in the same way, because we know already what is the outcome and we want this outcome. That's why we don't change. Thai people would say same, but different. That means it's, even if we do it differently, we are repeating the same. We are not changing the paradigm in it. The interest of congruence also, just think of political communication, as we have been talking about before. The political communication interested in congruence and not interested in difference, and always fighting because of differences, and always fighting in order to find the minimum of congruence. Maybe we could change that. I don't have to talk about more. Of course, I'm talking on a theoretical level, on the trying to find a logical level in order to intervene to the way of the daily practice as we do. In the interest of congruence, we have a unity scheme, which is, of course, philosophically, theologically, a challenge. Always the unity of God, the unity of family, the unity of state, the unity of society, the unity of whatever. The unity of communication, is, of course, it shows our desire to belong together. It shows our desire of sociability, and this is, as communication, the paradigm of humanism, of course, yeah. But the question is this really, is it really the last, the way to think? For example, one church, one religion, one language, one God, whatever. The model of difference says, thanks God, we have different languages. Thanks God, we have different religions. Thanks God, we have different organized societies and whatever. Because, and I'm trying to explain what I'm saying. If communication is the construction of reality, then it is, let me say, just a construction. It's not the reality, it's the construction as we think the reality. So that means it can always be thought in another way, and maybe this is theologically maybe spoken the continuation of creation, and it's philosophically spoken the way that the reality never is what the contingency gives us to challenge or to change. So if we think communication as the philosophical model of understanding ourselves in relation to the society we are living with, understanding the execution of our personal life in relation to others. And we can only think ourselves because we are able to see, to observe, to think about any other environment, social environment, cultural environment, natural environment, symbolic environment. Because as we are able to think about this environment, we have the challenge, but also the chance to think that we could be different in whatever we do, in whatever we are, in whatever we explain or interpret ourselves or our lives. As I said before, it could be the destination of ourselves, not to be defined. We need to define it by communication. And if we need to define it by, or to construct it by communication, then we need also, I think, the opportunity to think it in another way as we do. Because if this could be only in the model of unity, one language, one religion, one culture, whatever, or the interest of one region, one church, one state, and so on. So then this would be the most totalitarian thinking we could, how we could kill ourselves, the society and our lives and whatever. So when we understand communication as a sign or as a signature of life, so then it's communication, the paradigm of changing and of change. And this is better done maybe on a logical, theoretical level by diversity of models, by surprise, by discover, by enrichment of viability, as we could be able to do it. The paradigm of otherness, and not only the paradigm or the scheme of unity. So this is, as the interest of congruence is more interested in social control mechanism of individual sovereignty, the interest of difference is more interested in individual sovereignty of social control mechanism. Human being is the sovereign as we control, because the control is as we think things in order as they be, in order as to be. So this is, while the one is called a more affirmative paradigm of interest of knowledge, even more a repressive paradigm of interest is the interest of difference, a more emancipative paradigm of interest of knowledge, a more dialogical order and less discursive order, a more order in, not in dogma, but in heresy. And heresy does not mean I'm thinking wrong. Heresy just means I'm taking choice how I am thinking of what I am thinking. The next slide, please. So, as we have talked about action and observation as different models of, no, I'm sorry, this is that's wrong. I have already, yeah. Let's go to the next, I'm sorry, the next one. About, yeah, what I'm talking about, affirmation and emancipation. I mean, those are somehow interests of observation. am I observing things in order to affirm and to confirm what I'm seeing, that it's right, or maybe it's wrong? This is proper, yeah, critical rationalism, saying as long as I'm able to falsify things, they are not as I think they could be or should be. So this is an affirmative thinking. It's also, of course, a critical comment to Sir Karl Popper, while an emancipative interest of knowledge is otherwise. Let me say the first: the affirmative knowledge of interest of the affirmative interest of knowledge is to try to understand reality as I think or as it is, and its conditions to maintain it. I try to understand the functions and the structures, how they should function, and the functions in order to understand what structures should I develop in order to have those functions I want to have. So this is somehow an affirmative approach of interest of knowledge. And this is a theory as a model of evidence. And of course, it's somehow deburdening if we are able to think things in such a model of evidence, saying, I know how it is. Of course, it's much easier and much more, we would like to do it like more than in order to observe, in order to come to the result. We do not know what it means. We do not know what it is. So this is always the dilemma of doing the science. So in the affirmative model of interest of knowledge, we are using a logic of concern. We are concerned about. While in an emancipative understanding, or in an emancipative interest of knowledge, why are we doing, why are we observing, why are we analyzing? It's to find the logic of discovery, to come to a point where I did not know until now, or to come to a point where I say, I do not know. Reminding ourselves to Socrates, to Aristotle, and to old Greek philosophers, saying, we know that we do not know. This is the first step of doing science. And I think this is already reminds us of the possibility of an emancipative understanding of doing the knowledge, to get free from what we think it should be as we observe it. So this is what I said before. Theories help us to interrupt the routines of thinking. It's an understanding of reality as it could be. It's thinking in the interest of contingency. It's a theory as a reference of challenge, a point of challenge, and not a reference of having the right, or of being confirmed in what I'm thinking, or in what I have been thinking already. The next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah. So bringing that into systems, we have to think about those framing, those theoretical or epistemological framings. So there is a framing of that we could call culturalism, we could call structuralism, we could call functionalism, or we could call systems logic. You know all that. I know. But we have to decide. Of course, as you see here, all those fields, they are connected to each other. I cannot do cultural studies of communication and media not to observe and to see the structures or the functions or the system, of course. But the interest of the focus of interest is decisive, because, as I said before, the focus of interest shapes the paradigm and shapes the order in which I am observing what I observe, communication or media or whatever. in culturalism, my focus is the focus in meaning and relevance. And meaning and relevance is not something that is owned by the structures. Meaning and relevance is as I see what I am observing, what structures or functions I am observing. So it's in my head and not an attribute of the thing itself, of communication or of media as an object. Structuralism and functionalism are more like that. That means I'm observing the structures as would they be the moments of constructing communication or media or society or whatever. So I'm interested in finding out the characteristic structure, characteristics, focus on characteristics, identify the structures in order then to say this is communication, this is media, this is region, this is family, and whatever. Doing design means we do anything in order to know where should we what should we analyze in order to be able to protect ourselves before problems of communication, of media, of family, and whatever. While functionalism connected to structuralism is mostly interested in focus on performance and effects. Communication is when we understand each other. Society is when we are in solidarity to each other, when we are connected or controlled to each other, or family is when and whatever. So this is how things or systems should function. And that's why the systems theory and the system logic combines those, structuralism and functionalism, but not always in an interest of culturalism, even sometimes more, in the next slide, even more in the interest of as I say, in a constructivist understanding. But before I say that, I have to continue to complete this, talking about this interest of knowledge. There's another possibility to explain the interest of knowledge of phenomenology, which is more descriptive, but not as the phenomena are. It's a description as we observe the phenomena, because a phenomenon is not something that happens to my eyes. A phenomenon is as I observe a connectivity. So the description is not on an object. The description is as I see, as I said before, as I see what I call an object, like communication or media or society or politics or whatever. And the other way is the hermeneutics. It's related to phenomena because I try to understand why I understand communication as I understand. Or let's try to understand and to interpret why we understand the media as we understand them. Why understand the media, for example, as a tool of power, or as a tool of communication, or as a reference of communication, or as a reference of building the society. Let's think about and describe that. So this is somehow related to phenomenology, even if hermeneutics is much more philosophical, much more open than the system, the scientific system of phenomenology. And this can be done between analysis and interpretation. You know the analytical sociology and you know the interpretative sociology. The analytical one is more interested in nomothetic descriptions, things as they have to be. They are somehow, in German is Gesetzmäßigkeit, I don't know in English, they're somehow structured, they have to be as they are, or the way as I interpret them. And that means I am observing the observation. This is a critical point, a crucial point, sorry, of our understanding of social sciences. We are observing the observation. It means with our research, we observe not the objects, but we observe as we think about the objects, as we interpret them, as I tried to say all this time already before. So that means we are, next slide, yeah? We are thinking very much, as you see down, we're thinking very much in objective theories, in objective theoretical approaches. Yeah? A theory as a protocol of observation or a theory of even phototechnical picture of what we observe. And the other way is, what I'm trying to give you to understand is to have a concept theory. Think a theoretical understanding of how we think, or how even more, how we could think, or maybe how we should think about communication, society, family, religion, and so on. Yeah? And you see, there are different focuses. The one is an item focus, a distinctive perspective of an object, yeah? And the context focus, understanding something because we understand it as a moment of a context. We understand communication as a momentum of society. We understand culture as a momentum of society. We understand society as a momentum of communication, and culture as we understand as well communication as a as we understand. You know what I mean? Those three: communication, society, and culture. They are somehow in an auto-constitutive, as constructs, in an auto-constitutive relation. They need each other because you cannot talk about communication not talking about society and culture. You cannot talk about culture not talking about society, and you cannot talk about communication not talking about society and culture, and you cannot talk about society not talking about communication and culture. You know what I mean? I'm getting somehow it's a my English is not yet it's somehow I'm getting disturbed by repeating all this time, but I hope you could understand what I mean. Yeah, so I'm saying this just in order to give you also an idea of how can we order and how can we find a systematic of what we are thinking, or is there a systematic way to understand and constructivist, more cultural, studies-oriented understanding of communication? And yes, we can do because there's a history of ISMA, of different philosophical orientations, and there's a systematic of epistemology. So there is a possibility to describe on this level what we are doing if we study communication, and what we are doing if we analyze communication or media, of course. Yeah. The next slide maybe try to give us again a reference in order to have a structure. You know that, but I'm just trying to give it to understand what I'm trying to say here is, as you understood, I'm thinking more in a constructivist understanding of communication as the construction of reality, and I'm less thinking in a theory of objects. That means less in objectivism, communication as a protocol of an action. This is not what I think we should, as we should think communication. it's not just in the interest of structures, understanding communication by its structures, but more in the way of cultures trying to interpret the reality of communication as what it means to be, trying to interpret communication at what it means to be. And what it means to be is not what the communication itself means to be, but what we think it means to us. And it can mean, as I said before, and I tried to explain, we can define this meaning in very different ways. The next slide then is, as I said already, it's just the summary. It's if we want to understand, and I'm coming now to media, if we want to understand media as the environment, I'm saying not the tool, as the environment of communication, the environment of culture and its development, the environment of society and its development, and the environment of organizing community, communication, organizing society, and organizing culture, then we come to another understanding of media, not media as a system, not media as a tool, but media as a reference, understanding the society, understanding the communication, understanding the culture, and organizing this understanding of communication, society, and culture. It means we are living in a media society because when we, if you go back to the sorry, no, you don't have to go back now. If we understand media as a reference of communication and media as a reference of society and a reference of culture, then we also can talk about the quality of media, and the quality of media is mediality. That means communication, culture, and society, they are mediated. They are as we get them to understand. They are not as they are as we get them to understand in this connection of communication, culture, and society. So talking about then the mediality of communication, and this is what I think we should try to develop on a theoretical level, but is not talking about the theory of media, but talking about the theory of mediality. Then maybe we would be challenged not just to think about the mediality of communication, but also to think about the mediality of culture and the mediality of society, and to organize this knowledge of mediality of culture and society on a logical way. So this, I think, is some of the challenge of doing the theory of communication, or theorizing communication, or how we could understand the communication scientifically, as I tried to title my lecture. So the next two slides say a little, and I have to come to an end, and I'm not ending all those slides, but I'm coming to an end here. What we maybe, and you go to the next step, not so far. Where are you going? No, not so far. Komunikology is, yeah, thank you, yeah. What we need is, let me say, a broader understanding of the logics of communication, calling this komunikology, or in media, mediology. What is the logic of media, or the logical interpretation of media? What is the logical interpretation of communication? And I tried already to say that, and I'm giving us here again the idea, maybe we go back from those mechanical systems of, for example, partnership of communication, action-reaction model of communication, producer-user understanding model of communication, to a more open and a more open logical system, and find somehow a logical level for understanding communication that is closer to anthropology, in order to help us to understand more what it means for ourselves to be as a human being as we are. As I said before, it might be this destination of life to be undefined. I'm relating to Michel Foucault. And for that, we need communication in order to give us an idea what is the meaning of my and your and our lives, and as we do it. So this is, as I said before already, it's more cultural, it's more open, it's more interpretative, it's less mechanical, it's less mathematical, and by that way, less empirical, but more open, more interested in surprises of what we're thinking, and less interested in affirmation of what we already think. Related to a thinker whose name is Wilhelm Flusser. Maybe you have not heard yet about him. Wilhelm Flusser was an Austrian Czech philosopher living in Brazil for a long time because of the Nazi regime. He went to Brazil, and there he developed the so-called Komunikology. And his approach, on the page 11 already of his first book, he's saying communication might be or is the art trick of man to forget about the finiteness of his life. And you see, this is a philosophical approach, saying communication is the point of interpretation of what does it mean that I am as I am, or that I do as I do, or we are as we are. So it's a construction of reality, because reality is not as we observe them as an object against or towards us. It's always as we think it. And if reality is as we think it, or the world is as we think it, we are challenged to change our thinking in order to change the society, to change the world. Terima kasih. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Bauer, for your delightful and inspiring presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests, this is the end of Science Communication and Explication International webinar held by School of Communication at Jaya Catholic University. But before we end today's event, I would like to request all of the speakers and guests to open your camera and take some photos for today's webinar documentary. Thank you for all the participation. So once again, thank you for the speakers and guests. Bon voyage and goodbye.